Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of Changemakers in Autism. Thrilled today to join you with my co-host, Dr. David Wilson, and one of my very favorite and trusted advisors, Liz Shea, who is an attorney and a consultant in the disability space. Liz, we're so happy to talk to you today about what we might expect, what families might expect as we usher in this next administration here in New Jersey. Maybe you could just start us out, give us a little bit of information about you and your background and why you're so passionate about this topic.
Great. Yeah. So first, thanks for having me. I love just in general our collaboration and working with Reed, and in general working with families. So just quick background. I have been in the developmental disability community in New Jersey, primarily done some work federally in other states, but primarily in New Jersey for pretty much my whole career, which is many, many years now. We'll leave out how many. But I, did a little bit of work early on in homelessness, but then pretty much just fell into sort of the disability space and really fell in love with it. Worked my way up through a variety of things and actually ran the New Jersey Division of Developmental Disabilities for several years during the reform period, right? When we were going from contract reimbursement to fee for service and the old assessment tool to the current assessment tool and all kinds of change all happening. And then, left there, I can't even believe now it's been 8 years, about 8 years ago, and went into, private practice. And so I do work with groups of families, with one-on-one with families, with providers, compliance, sort of across the board. But the reason I'm happy to be here now and be talking about this specific topic is I think service providers and advocacy organizations, I think for the most part are aware of the fact that, well, everyone's hopefully aware that there's a new administration coming in, right? That we have a gubernatorial election. But I think that advocacy organizations and service providers are aware of how much of a difference that may make to the services that we have. And I'm not so sure that all the families that I interact with are always as tuned into how much of a difference that actually could make. I think that what I get sort of told a lot from families are, well, it's probably not going to sort of trickle down to DDD and to, whatever changes happen will be up here, not happening sort of within DDD. And it could be that could happen, but it's wildly unlikely that we won't see some change with the new administration. So I think just for families to know that there is probably some change coming, to know about the opportunities to actually make an impact, have their voice heard. Good and bad change could be coming, right? Like we don't know, but being aware of that, know what to be watching out for. I think the timing of this is critically important. So I'm grateful for the chance to talk to you guys today.
Sure. I think what's hard for all of us is that there's just a lot of noise in the space. And it's, my experience has been that, families of children and adults with disabilities and in particular autism families are, they're about action, and they want to advocate, and they want to know very specifically how to be effective in conveying their perspective and their point. And so, what do you think the first thing that families should, what is the first thing that families should really be paying attention to as we, usher in a new administration?
So I think, as I said, just the fact that there is a new administration coming in and there may be change coming, there are a lot of early on signs, I think, when any new administration takes over, that people, even in just language, right, that I think you can start to get a sense of where things might be headed way before we even actually see any change. So if the new, administration comes in and there's a lot of discussion about Medicaid waste, fraud, and abuse, and there's a lot of discussion about, rolling things back, and there's a lot of discussion about finding efficiencies in those things, that sort of leads us into one thought about where we kind of might be headed. If you hear more about expansion and you hear more about then it's maybe a slightly different thing. So I think just getting an ear for kind of what, even when I shouldn't even say even, especially I think when you hear, new folks in the administration talking about the budget, that's when you'll really start to get right. Because of course the money is where priorities get very, very quickly shown. So listening just for some of that language, the people that come in, there's likely to be some change in kind of who we interact with. Sometimes people at the assistant commissioner level, which is where I was, right, change, not always, sometimes they do, but certainly the commissioner level is, usually change. It's not every time also, but usually. So and then depending on their priorities, they may or may not put in a whole bunch of people kind of way down the line. So, and I think the other thing is both with autism and just in general with developmental disabilities, we get very, very focused on DDD in New Jersey. And really, there's also obviously the Department of Children and Families and CSOC and everything related there. But then there's Medicaid. And the sort of division director or the state director of Medicaid, that person matters quite a bit, because that's going to really set the stage for the relationship between the state office of Medicaid and federal Medicaid, which, is going to be funding all of our services. So just keeping an eye on kind of who the people are, understanding that there might be different people to have conversations with, understand what their priorities are. I think that's clearly important, even down to the level of potentially the ombudsman, right? If we still have an ombudsman and what that role is and whatever. So I think watching that. But I think the most important thing that I would say to any family right now is, as this happens, the first thing that's going to happen, regardless of whether or not we have a party change, right? So regardless of who actually wins, there will be a transition team. There's always, anytime a new administration comes in, the second the election's done, they're already putting them together now, like they have been for months, right? So the second the election is done and we know who's going to be the new governor, this team of people will be getting together to start to talk about how to transition. There will be undoubtedly a human services committee or subgroup on that team. Obviously, and a lot of people are kind of vying to get on there. That's a great thing to be a part of if you can. But no matter whether you're on it or not, there will definitely be opportunities. They will solicit input. So I would say to families, staying very, very closely attached to advocacy organizations, provider organizations that you work with, and understanding kind of what relationships they may have, what they're hearing, what opportunities there may be to provide input, but also just to send in your own. There is nothing that says that you can't write a letter. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to know the ins and outs of even the specifics of what you're asking for. I think it could be as basic as, my name is Liz Shea. I have a daughter, son, nephew, whatever, with autism. This is what his life currently looks like. I'm very concerned about these changes. I think this change would be good. You don't have to put it in policy language. It can be very, very kind of basic, but that stuff filters its way into the transition document. And the reason I bring that up, I think some people think, these transition documents are like everybody sits around, they just like sit on a shelf, and maybe some of them do, but I will tell you, I have seen people pull those original things out 5, 6, 7 years later and sort of reference back things that came up during the transition. So sometimes they're taken very seriously, and they kind of set the blueprint and that's what they're meant to do, right? For where you're going. So, not just sitting and waiting, I think would be my main thing. Don't just sit and wait and see what happens. Like, be heard right away. Be ready right now. Just say, if the new governor called me up tomorrow and asked me what I would want, be ready for your answer to that. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, in the policy lingo, but be ready to tell them what you want for your son or daughter. Put that on paper. And the second you can, send it into the transition, the human services subcommittee or whatever, do that. I think that would be what I would say would be the most important thing to be looking at now for any family that would be willing to do it. It only helps us.
That's great feedback, and something people can actually just, put pen to paper and and get all that out immediately.
Yeah. Now, Liz, when you say budgetary changes, I think everybody's ears perk up. So where could families go, or even providers, sort of track where the money is being allocated, specifically with autism services?
Yeah. So, that's such a good question. So I'm going to start my answer to that with sort of maybe an unpopular thought, which is that I think it's really important to have some perspective in terms of the actual dollars that we're talking about, right? That are going into the developmental disability sort of industry in New Jersey. So, again, now this is probably doubled since then, but back when I was there, let's talk even 8 years ago, the budget at DDD at the time was about $2 billion. That was the DDD budget. The state budget was like 30 or something, 31, 32, something like that. So it was like between 6, 7, 8% of the state budget was the DDD side. That was 21 and up. So no children's services were in that. 2 billion. Well, no children's services were in that. Aging people who are in the like managed long-term services and supports like nursing home community, that's not included in that. Housing, not included in that. Food, not included in that. Clothing, not included in that. That was the service dollars for the people that were being supported by DDD. $2 billion. Is it money well spent? Of course it's money well spent, right? Absolutely. But I used to have to sit in rooms regularly with, assistant commissioners of other populations and other groups, and they would say, you have $2 million budget. I'm struggling with a, $3 million, like trying to get by. And so I say all of that just because it's two things. One, it's an expensive service system, right? Like it just is. It's an expensive thing to provide 24/7, especially like quality level supports for people, for humans. I mean, this is not something that you can take lightly. So people, I think it's just important to kind of know that going in. And the other thing, more importantly, is there's already a lot of money there. That's not to say that we want cuts or that we can sustain cuts. I'm not suggesting in any way, but I do think, I think we get sometimes a little too focused on the money and not as much focused on the policy. So one of my first responses to that, and I'm going to answer the actual question, I promise, but one of my first responses to that would be maybe don't get terrified by the thought of there might be some small cut. I say this to families all the time. And by the way, I fully acknowledge I differ with a lot of other advocates. I have friends who have heard me say that in front of groups of parents and are like, are you out of your mind? We have to say no cuts ever under any circumstances. I get it from an advocacy perspective, but having been on the other side of it, if you're there in government and every single one of your populations and constituencies comes to you and says, well, we can't take any cuts. And then the federal government says, well, you have to make 30% cuts. So it's going to have to come from somewhere. So thinking through, are there places that we can come up with maybe other ways to improve our lives via policy shifts, et cetera, and not make it all about the money is really, really helpful. So that's, just a kind of side note. In terms of your actual question though, David, like tracking the money itself, the money really is going into services. I think certainly we have a lot of, there's press on this and there's discussions around this. And I think there's concern that there's all this money that's just going, I don't know where they think it's all going, but where people that are, think that money's not being well spent. But if anyone ever really looked at the actual land, Chantelle, you can tell anybody this, right? The actual P&L, like if you looked at kind of the service provider, especially one that's doing residential and day services and those types of services, what it actually costs to have around the clock staff at that level, get trained at that level, all of that, it's shocking to people. They just can't conceive or perceive that that's real. So, again, I think getting to a point of that education for families to start to really come to grips with just how expensive the services are, I think would be very helpful. I do. I think it would be really helpful. That kind of knowledge, I think, is power. And I think that would be a useful endeavor if we could get people a little bit more educated about that.
Yeah, great advice.
Yeah.
So you mentioned briefly in that, when you were answering David's question that, the federal government, right? If we could go back to that a little bit, we know that the federal disability policy often shapes, our state decisions. So what do you think that New Jersey families, can expect from Washington in this coming year?
More just sheer insanity. I mean, likely, right? Only because who knows? Okay. So I think conventional wisdom, right, would say that when you're looking at sort of an administration like the one we currently, well, there is no real conventional wisdom with our current, federal administration. It's just like now all bets are off, obviously, right now. But in general, anytime you have sort of the, Republicans in power on the federal side, you start to look at things like block granting, for Medicaid, right? Which for anyone listening who's not aware, federal Medicaid is literally the entire backbone of every single DD related service in New Jersey and in most of the country, but certainly in New Jersey. So a change to Medicaid federally, it can completely change the landscape of what we have. So, by way of by what I mean by block granting, for anyone who's not familiar, again, this has been this common theme that they've been talking about for decades, about instead of sort of negotiating the specifics of what states have to cover in their Medicaid plans, et cetera, you would just sort of say there's going to be this pot of money and that's capped. The federal government will give the state a capped pot of money, and then they sort of work around with it in there. There's been a very, very strong fear amongst a lot of disability organizations for decades about what block grants could do. And again, I'm certainly not welcoming of block grants, but I'm also not, to me, I don't really feel like the money is the problem, right? Like, I feel like the problems that we have in our service system are not about there not being enough funding and not about us not being able to find enough funding. I really feel like by and large, the problems are policy related. So, we could be looking at that. I would say to people, don't panic. First of all, I would say don't panic if you hear block grants, because you're going to hear it anyway. We've been hearing it for 30 years and it hasn't yet sort of made its way. First of all. Second of all, even if it is going to make its way, it's going to take time to do because it's government. Government is just slow, right? So there's going to be lots of opportunities along the way to sort of effectuate some potential change. And third, I'm not so sure that, I think there are other things that would be scarier, but I'm not so sure that it's necessarily sort of the death of our entire system, right? Like we too will survive. Like we will figure out how to manage it and come up with sort of policy within that as well. So, but I do think we're going to be hearing about block grants. I think we are going to be hearing from the feds, which we already have. Really already have a lot about waste, fraud, and abuse auditing. I think we can expect some very, very sort of widespread federal audits on providers related to that. So I think we should, be prepared in lots of ways for that. But again, that will impact families because it will impact services sort of down the line. But frontline, that's not the kind of thing I think families need to worry too much about. My best advice, again, on the federal side is really, really, I don't know, it's twofold. It's not to get yourself too crazy about it, right? Until it actually happens, because we're all over the map about what it's going to be. And also to really, really pay attention to what really is changing as opposed to the rhetoric, right? Because, so just to give you an example of what I mean by that, there's been a lot of discussions about within the Medicaid system about changing the process, making people go through the redetermination process for Medicaid more often, than previously they've been, required to. Everybody's up in arms. Again, not that it's, is it being done likely to try to pull more people off and make it harder for people to be on Medicaid? Yeah, of course. Government does all those kinds of things all the time because it's too much money. This will be, maybe we can find an 8% savings across the system if we just make it so hard that some people drop out. Yes, I think that's terrible. However, if that change in fact comes through and is realized, my message to families would be, all right, well, it's a really stupid, irritating new thing that you have to do, where you have to do it more often. Just be ready for it. This change to you, if you know what I mean, if you choose to be very, very prepared and ready to do it, won't have an impact. So don't make yourself nuts. Just spend your time, instead of fighting that, and being angry about it and going on social media and arguing with each other. Instead, spend your time, get your paperwork in order, make sure you have all the documents there, make sure you are ready so that if somebody called you tomorrow and said it's time to do your redetermination, you could hand over your paper and you would be fine. So I think if families and, in general can just shift their thinking to what is really happening, like the actual policy change, not all the politics around it, I think that would be helpful for a lot of people. And that's hard to do. I get swept up in the politics too. It's hard not to.
Can I ask a follow-up question about block grants, which might kind of show my ignorance on the topic, but how is that pool of money determined, per state? Because I'm thinking about our program, and we know just anecdotally, we can all recount situations of families who have moved here from other states because our service, landscape is so rich here, and so I would like to think that New Jersey is serving a group of people who, and doing a really great job. So how do they determine, how much money each state gets?
No, so that's you got into the exact point, right? The exact problem. There are, I don't know, 1 million different ways that they could do that calculation. And depending on who's talking about it at the time, it comes with lots of very specific, sort of in the weeds versions of exactly what that should look like. Historically, until recently, it has not been, even in the most, extreme circumstances, like I said, until now, I've never seen anyone talk about it as being sort of divided up by politics. Now I even hear that, right? In the same way we see some other, like now I even hear like, well, if you're with me politically, you get more. If you're not, you get less. Like those kinds of scary things. So again, I don't know that any of that ever can sustain it, and happen. But that's the question. That is exactly the point, Chantelle. That is the question, because if it's a huge pot of money, great. If it's at least what we have, if not more, and there's wonderful. If it's less, that's a problem, right? So it depends on how is that calculation, and then not only just what is it now, but how does it grow, right? Like what's the determination? What kind of COLA is there on there forever? Or are we all just supposed to manage within that number and then watch inflation go up and then services get smaller and smaller? So it's, that's the devil's in the detail.
Interesting. So you've said a few times that families should sort of stay calm and stay strategic in the way that they're following policy shifts. If, however, they were upset by various policies, how would they make their voice heard? What advice would you give them in terms of speaking out against the policy change?
Okay. So first of all, I think it's a great question, because that's the most important part is actually, right, like have your voice heard. I think it can get very intimidating for families. I think families sometimes feel like they're kind of one person. How is this going to matter? I'm going to actually tell you a story about that, because I think it's really, really helpful for people to realize how much of a difference it can make. But before that, I would say, I think it's two things. I think families are best served when they do literally two things. One is get hooked up with someone, right? An advocacy organization that you believe in, a provider that's hooked up with that, whatever, a coalition, some group that's organized for the purpose of doing this kind of work. Have that be, those are the people that, you watch, you get all your alerts, action alerts come in, whatever, keep up to date with what's going on. How is the federal policy going to impact whatever? So definitely getting hooked up with that and using that as just a place to, okay, now is a good time, so that you don't have to become an expert in exactly when, I'm supposed to send whatever. So that's very important. But the second part, I think, might almost be more important, which is the first thing that we talked about, which is just, figuring out your own family's sort of narrative and putting it on paper. I think if people can say, what can I do? You know what I mean? The oh my gosh, I'm staying up all night. I'm so nervous about what's going to happen. Okay, instead of staying up all night and being nervous, I would say stay up all night and sit at your computer and literally write your story. I don't mean you have to write a book, but just write your story, talk about your son or daughter, explain what services they get, explain what it does, explain what would happen if they didn't get those services, explain what needs to be better, what, like all of that. And have that prepared, because that information is going to be the thing that really, really can make the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's really the personalized stories that have the largest impact.
Yep, completely. And so the story I was going to tell, when I was very, very, very early on in my career, I started doing, like early governmental affairs type of work in the DD world. And I happened to be standing, because I was just like meeting with people in the then governor's office, like just standing around with a group of other lobbyists and advocates and stuff, standing around talking. And someone came walking by, I don't know who they were, someone who worked there, all in a big flourish. There's, people, everyone's calling, like it was completely, oh my God, like you would think that they were like the whole building was like they were storming the building, right? It's a thing, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, so, and they were all talking about it and chit chat and this big event. I don't even know what the issue was. I don't remember. It had nothing to do with our stuff. It was some other group. And so then we went into our meeting, and then we came out, and we ended up running into someone that a couple of us knew who worked in the governor's office at the time. We said, what was that? Like, are you guys getting like, who they must be doing a great job, like whatever. And she said, oh yeah, well, we got like 4 or 5 calls like in the same day, on this issue. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily typical, but what I'm saying is it literally can be that, right? So people have this feeling, I think, that, oh my God, well, there's thousands of people writing letters to their legislators and to the governor telling their stories, and mine's going to get lost. I guarantee there are way more people writing letters to like B-level celebrities. And I mean like BBDC level, like low, like Carrot Top. You know what I mean? Level, like,
Okay.
sorry, Carrot Top, if you're listening. But like, honestly, like I guarantee
We'll edit that out.
I guarantee there's more people writing letters to those folks than to their legislators. Sure. So you really can get hurt. Like you really can. So yeah.
That's great advice for families. I think that if you don't spend time in government, right, as you have, Liz, I mean, I think it does seem a little bit like, what goes on behind the curtain and how do we get things done and what's the most effective way to handle some of those situations. So, for families who are looking to kind of navigate this political environment, you mentioned associations and coalitions and what are some strategies or even recommendations, if you're willing to give them, for people looking for just real credible information, right? Just really factual, unbiased, information.
Well, it's like the question of the century. Because I don't know. I feel like at this point in time, and my son teases me all the time. I just the other day I said, I found this great thing about some AI robot in California that was doing such and such. And he's like, Mom, that is like fake. I'm like, I don't know. Okay, I don't even know.
I've been bamboozled too. I'll show my kids a video and they're like, that is AI, or what is wrong with you? And I'm like, show me the way. What did you see that I can't see?
So maybe the answer is ask your children and they'll tell you. But no, I think in terms of, obviously primary sources, which is again why I said from the beginning, I think if you can that's why it's so helpful to find one or two sort of well-known groups. Stay off of getting your information, obviously, from TikTok and Facebook and these places, because then you'll be like me. But not only from the organizations, but actually going and looking at the original sources themselves, right? I have just very recently started even going online. You didn't used to have to do this as much because it was easier to feel like you knew who your clear sources were, right? I feel like it's just hard in today's world. So I've actually started I go to whitehouse.gov and I read exactly what was said. And then I go to the New Jersey Department of, Education and I read exactly what is on there and go, now, again, that's a lot for families to do, which is why get hooked up with an advocacy organization who's doing that work for you. And there are many, right, who are doing that. Or, provider organizations like READ that are working very closely with other advocacy organizations and lobbyists, et cetera, who can filter that down for you. So yeah, it's really just about identifying what are going to be my main sources that I know are good and I'm going to kind of, live there. And then secondarily to that question, I think we talked about this a little bit already, but, making sure that you're listening to the details, not the sort of rhetoric, right? So, that those headline versions of things when, we're seeing these cuts or this, and it's like, well, what are what's actually happening, right? And if it's, there's one proposed bill that could potentially impact this benefit, which could filter down 3 years later to impact this benefit, which, yes, that's good that we know about that and we should be thinking about it, but that's not the same thing as I'm going to lose services tomorrow. And so really, really understanding what are we actually talking about? I think that's so important. I see too many people that are they don't even know what's real. They don't even know, and they're just nervous, like all the time nervous. And that's the part that I'm trying to, tamp down because we have to get out of that.
In this headline soundbite sort of world we're in, that's actually easier said than done, I think, right? You do sort of get so you go down the rabbit hole because you see a disturbing headline and it turns out to not, to be exactly what you said, which is not a huge impact on things.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I mean, not for nothing, but I'm not so sure that families of people with autism don't have enough on their plates, that they need to be spending time going down these rabbit holes and have enough to be concerned about already, that now they have to be doubly worried about cuts or events or policy shifts that may or may not ever even take place or have any impact on them in the first place. So yeah, it's just like a deep breath time is what I keep telling you. It's a time to be engaged. actually be watching. Like I said, look for your, but just try to kind of stay grounded. It's hard.
Yeah, it's confusing. So could you speak to a time when you were working in government that sort of taught you a lesson of how confusing the systems are?
I have so many good government stories, but we would be here forever. I'm at some point I'm going to do a stand-up comedy routine on my time in government. I have so many good stories, the ones that would blow your mind. But to the specific question related to showing me how confusing things are. Yeah, although I mean it's embarrassing for me, but I'll tell it because it's sort of embarrassing across the board. I think for all of us that were there, but it's a perfect example. So I was probably at the state for maybe 2 to 3 months, right? So it wasn't like my first week or something, but I also had not been there a long time. And I brought the leadership team together and we all sat down. And I don't even think I was the assistant commissioner yet. I think I was working within the department doing like policy, I think. So we brought the leadership team in at DDD and we all sat around and I can't even remember how it started, but we were trying to solve for some kind of problem. And whatever it was that we were talking about, someone said, just very openly, oh, well, we can't do that in group homes. Like you're not allowed to do whatever the thing was we wanted to do. Can't happen in a group home. I said, oh, okay, well, just like, so I understand like why. I don't know what the answer was. They're like, yeah, but I know I'm going to ask. And I said, I know I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud. I'm embarrassed that in my position that I have to ask this question, but like, what is a group home? Like just what is one, right? And the entire room was like completely silent, right? So I'm like, all right, well, let's just talk through it. Like, because it's probably more obvious. Maybe that's just what I want to say because I sound like a dope, and maybe it's very obvious. So let's just kind of talk through it. So I just mean like what differentiates a group home? Like I understand it's a group of people living in a home, right? So it's probably going to be 2+ people. So of course the first thing is like, no, we have group homes of 1. And I was like, okay, so it's like not even a group. Okay, got it. Let's start there. Okay, no problem. So it's 1 to what? 1 to, well, it's usually 4 people. Oh, okay. Well, but sometimes we have 6. Got it. So it's anywhere between 1 and 6 people living in a home. Well, we have a couple 8s. Okay. So let's say it's anywhere between 1 and 8 people living in a home. I said, is that like in the statute? I don't even know, in the regulations somewhere. Well, actually the waiver with the feds say 12. Oh, okay. So it's somewhere between 1 and 12 people living in a home. Is it like a single family home? Well, no, we have apartments that are licensed as group homes. Oh, well, don't we have apartments that are licensed as apartments? Yes. Okay, so what's the difference? Is it like the staffing ratio? Like, is it dependent on that? No, we have a lot of overlap in terms of the staffing ratios between the two of them. Oh, okay. Well, is it like who owns it? No, we have some that are owned by families, some that are owned by providers, some that are owned individually by the people. We went around and around. I swear we were 45 minutes in the room. And by the time we left, we did not know. And I sit here today, and I will tell you that I'm sure someone will be mad at me about saying this and correct me. But today, I have been in this field for 30 years. I cannot tell you what a group is, really what it is. Like actually I can tell you what we say if it's a group home you can't do. But I can't tell you what it actually is. And to me, given how how much of an inside view I've had, the fact that I don't even know that, to me is like a perfect example. How in the world do we expect families to answer these questions or navigate any of this silliness when we can't even answer the most kind of basic questions like that?
Yeah,
right?
And it sounds like the more questions you ask, the more confusing it becomes.
It was insane.
Yeah.
I can't even describe it. It was absolutely insane. Yeah.
And, as providers, I think we've been in situations like that. And at the end of the day, it's our job, and we're expected to navigate with that uncertainty and figure things out. I've talked on this podcast before that I have a sister with disabilities and I see, my mom who is, getting older and trying to navigate some of that confusion and, not her own confusion. She's perfectly clear. It's the confusion with the system and the constant changes. And, it's like, well, we used to do it this way, but now we do it that way. And just all of a sudden, one day something changes and now you have to adhere to this new policy. And, for our adult families, I think there's a fatigue factor in all of this. It's like we've spent our whole lives working hard to make sure that, our adult children will be cared for and our legacy is to leave them in a good place. And to know that we've done that. And when the rules are always changing, it's hard to watch that for my own family. It's hard to watch that for the families that, are part of our READ community, that they just, the undercurrent is they just want to do what's going to set their child up for success long term for the rest of their lives. And that target is always moving. It's I know I'm like preaching to the choir here, but it's seeing it as a provider and then also as a family member for me has just been really enlightening.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, so glad you brought that up, because I think the most interesting thing in there, so if I could right now, if I were telling the transition team what I would do, right? Again, just from my vantage point, only literally from what I've kind of learned, one of my biggest messages would be the sort of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it message. And here's why. I lived the idea of when you're there, and we were doing a lot of reform that was years in the making and, whatever. And I certainly think a lot of what we did was positive change, but it was so much change. And while you're there and you're doing it, you're so, even the, I know I was there and my leadership team was amazing. We had people there who they were working. People can say whatever they want about government workers. We were there. We all had young kids and we were giving up time after. We were there until midnight, week after week after week on, multiple days a week and coming in on weekends, always working on the holidays, all that, just to try to actually get the system into a better place. I mean, it really, really was like very well intentioned. But with that said, you get sort of like caught up in it, right? So you're in it. And it's so easy for me to look back now and realize with a little hindsight, that you're doing it for the right reasons. You're looking to change things, but you sort of forget that the actual change in and of itself really better be worth it because of your point, Chantelle, right? Because people are so tired and, okay, if I can make a process slightly better, or maybe even slightly whatever, unless I really know it's gonna actually bring a lot of improvement, can we just leave people alone? Because just the act of the change itself is exhausting for providers, for families, certainly for people with disabilities themselves. And then what happens is every time new people come in, again, rightly, people with the right intention, usually everybody wants to put their mark on it, right? Now I'm going to come up in a new thing and a new thing. And it's very hard, I think, to come in and have I would consider this sort of discipline to say, I'm not going to change anything unless I really am sure that it has to be changed in order to make something better. I think that would be a spectacular sort of point to make to any incoming administrator. Because no one said that to me. I wasn't thinking that way at the time. And there were probably things that we could have left alone. And we were just like, oh, this will be so good, because it's all, like I said, it's well-intentioned, but you're exhausting people. You're absolutely exhausting them. So it's such a good point. It's such a point well taken.
Yeah, I feel like families, the families that we serve and, those, that are with other service providers, the one thing that, they're good at many things, but they do what needs to be done, right? So if a rule changes, they're on it. They know it. They want to make sure they're in compliance with it. And that has to do with service provision and funding and, special needs trusts and ABLE accounts. And, it's just the volume of things. I mean, it's just mind blowing sometimes what these families have to deal with. Maybe we're kind of rolling up here on maybe the end of our time, and maybe you should leave us with some words of what brings you kind of some glimmers of hope in all of this. Sort of what are some of the bright spots that you see for families and for providers, and specifically individuals with autism in New Jersey?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a lot of them, right? And I know I touched on earlier that there really is money in the system already. That's a good thing. There are a lot of states where their systems are so massively underfunded that they're kind of going into these new current times without resources at all to work with. So we're at least coming into it somewhat decently resourced. And I think that's helpful and important to kind of just keep in the back of our minds. But in terms of what gives me hope, I got to say, I think it's the siblings. I think it's the young people. I'm so excited by just the number of people that I'm seeing with a completely different perspective, and they're not as tired, rightly, right? Because they haven't been through, all of it, and they have a completely different perspective on things, and they're challenging all of the old nonsense that we, put into place and stood for all this time. And so just watching the youth, and they embrace technology in a way that I think we historically have not at all across human services, not just in the disability world, but certainly across the social services sector and Medicaid. And I just don't see them putting up with a world whereby we don't utilize technology in a way to make people's lives better. And think about those kinds of things and have some openness about those, the kind of efficiencies that you can find that actually will help people in terms of tech. So, I think it's really, I think there's lots of good things. We have, just the fact that we're talking more about it, we're talking openly about it, but really those young people are, to me, they give me all the hope in the world. I'm extremely hopeful. I'm extremely exhausted. I'm sort of where you and your mom are, Chantelle, personally, but I'm extremely hopeful when I just have those conversations. I would say to anyone, oh, just go talk to somebody who's like 21 or 17 or, my son's age, he's 16 right now, and he's got a million ideas about how to, make the system sustainable and how it's going to be okay and like all that stuff. And that's what, to me, that's everything. Right. That does it all.
Yeah, that's great. It is inspiring interacting with people who are younger, have the energy and just a fresh set of eyes and ideas. You really have to keep in touch with that. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also kind of weird to be on the old side of that, you know?
I think about it regularly. I'm used to it. I just got used to it. I'm embracing it. I decided a long time ago, I'm going to hit an age where I can literally wear anything and I'll just be the wacky old lady and I can say anything. I'll just be those. So I'm embracing this segment of my life.
leaning in. Well, David and Liz, why don't we do this again after the election when we have some time to sort of see how things are evolving, and maybe we'll have some follow-up conversation around what families and providers can expect. But David, thanks for co-hosting with me, and Liz, thanks for everything you do, certainly for Reed and for our families, but all the change that you've affected in New Jersey. You're a force, and we're really grateful for you.
Thanks. Same back at you. It was great to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me.